to even add 25% yields in agriculture in 40 years is incredible. To double it is amazing. And that is to do that, China had to move. In the end, it will be 1 billion people, but at the moment it's 700 million people off of the land, off of poverty. To do that, they had to find them outlets in order to live and earn money and contribute to the wealth and future of China. To do that, they had to build export capability. To do that, they had to build road, railways, highways, ships, all sorts of things to open up markets. It's just incredible. And within that, it's built a modern nation. And within that, China has 60% of the world's network of high-speed trains. China is advancing in almost every sector, except maybe football. But it is an incredible achievement, what's been achieved in these 40 years. And when people decry China, and yes, there are issues around human rights, which our society suffered from as well. Our industrial revolution, our development of a modern economy had many problems with human rights, and it took us about 150 years to get our human rights correct. It's no good us saying to China, you have to have a human rights like us after 200 years. We didn't give everybody the vote until 200 years of industrial revolution. You know, so there are parts of the development of China which I'm sure that in time will modify and change and update. But overall, the achievements are just phenomenal in 70 years. And your system works, and it's delivered for the people. And when people say to me, well, aren't the people of China controlled, contained, and lack independent ability to speak their mind? I say, what are you talking about? You talk about whether they want to speak their mind about something like Brexit? Well, we apparently have a problem with that, as much as China has. I find that the Chinese people are very much today like they were over 5,000 years. You get on and run the country, and we'll get on and run our lives. And that's what happens. And sometimes there are clashes between the interests of the people and the interests of government, and they get sorted out. But I would say that overall, the progress of China over these last 70 years is one of the miracles of the modern world, and we would do well to learn from it.
What kind of experience do you think the other outside world can learn from China through the 70 years?
I think it's a very interesting question. You know, I say to people, first of all, the challenges facing the Chinese government and the challenges facing the British government or the American government are the same. They're how to represent the interests of the people, how to develop health, welfare, education, employment, safety, security, etc. The challenges are the same. We in the West have a problem now for many years of spending more on welfare and health than we can afford to spend. We're caught in a trap on it. China has spent the last 30, 40 years working out how to build a modern health and welfare structure. And it's doing it. And I could explain to people how it's doing it. But the most important thing is that when we go to China, when our leaders go to China, they should ask China, what did all your research produce? You looked around the world at health and welfare everywhere. What did your analysis show? What conclusions did you draw? And what are you doing as a result of them? So there are, in every area, enormous conclusions for us to draw. You take another example, export policies, or you take the car sector, or you take nuclear, or you take telecoms. In every area, China uses what's called the scientific method. And the scientific method is something that's not understood in the West. And it's more advantageous with some country with China's cultural history and with its Marxist background. But what it is about testing everything before you do it and doing the research before you do it. It's an enormous disciplinary control over urges to take action. You do the work you've got to do to check things out before you take the steps. So China is less impulsive. The stimulus program of 2008 was perhaps an example of doing things too impulsively. It created consequences that people hadn't expected. The type of stimulus policies that have been engaged in the last year and going forward are much more carefully thought out and done separately so that each one of them can be examined. So these methods of running government are very important for people in the West to understand. And in my experience, China will share its experience freely and easily. It just has to be sure that it's not going to be abused as a result of sharing. And then if you take the rest of the world, if you take Africa, you take Central Asia, you take South America, who have been taught a development process from the West, which has failed. Those countries haven't succeeded. They haven't come out of. China has come out of the development trap by using its own different method. Some people call it the Beijing Consensus. It's a rather simplistic term. But clearly now Africa, Central Asia, and South America, Middle East, they're turning much more to the Chinese system of development. It doesn't mean they're becoming communists or socialists or anything like that at all, but it means they're looking at taking advantage of the experience of China. And, you know, that's good for the West, because the more prosperity there is in the world, the more growth there is in the world, and we feed on growth. And so China is contributing a great deal to a number of countries who will help us by buying our goods, our services, and be good investment opportunities for the West. The big difference between China and the Soviet Union, and I'm not criticizing the Soviet Union, they grew up in a different era. You know, Marx has made a magnificent contribution to political economy. But he created a situation which, partly of his own making and partly of the making of the Soviets and partly because of the reaction of the West to Marx, it created a permanent conflict between the West and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was seen to want to defeat the West and replace it by communism or socialism, and the West was seen as trying to defeat Bolshevism, Marxism, Leninism as a threat to the capitalist system in the West. What Xi Jinping has said is, you have your system, we have our system. Let's not try and change each other's systems. This what I've said in those few words, probably badly, is of the greatest and most utmost importance in the future of world peace. He has said, we are not trying to change you. Please don't try and change us. And that is entirely different to the relationship that existed between the Soviet Union and the West. And in the approach of Trump, President Trump, to China, it is because around him, the people around him don't understand well enough what China is doing. Now, some people may say, you're a fool, Mr. Perry. China's only saying these things so that it can sneak along and become the biggest power in the world, and then it'll act like every other empire and dominate the world. Am I such a fool? I mean, I can see that problem. I can see the Gang of Four existed. It could exist again. There is a risk that China could become an empire. It's not in Chinese history, and Chinese intellectual analysis of empires shows that there's one thing for sure about an empire, is it will fall. So why spend all this time building China for it to fall? Most empires fall because they need growth around them. China's not putting growth in as a permanent need of China. The growth is to get to a certain point and then stabilize China around a certain level of standard of living for the vast majority of its people. So why would it want to go and engage in wars overseas? It's not in Chinese history. And look at America. It's caught up with the most enormous expenditure on a military, and that is exactly the norm for empires. Every empire, ours, the British Empire, is built on a big military. So you have to be very careful that you're not going to go down that road. I don't think China is going to go down that road, but some fear that that is the real purpose of China. If it is, failure waits China. I don't think it is where China's going.
China has experienced somewhat economic slowdown during maybe the first half of this year.
Yeah.
Do you still feel optimistic for the future development of the Chinese economy?
Yeah, you know, the President